Hi, I'm Emma Spett.
And I'm Chris Callahan.
I work with the Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships and the Office of Engagement, both based at the University of Vermont.
And I'm with UVM Extension, based in Bennington, Vermont.
And we're excited to share a new podcast with you. It's called Partners in Place, and it comes to you from the University of Vermont. We'll be bringing you stories of research, education, and extension partnerships across Vermont. Each episode will focus on a different project that deals with a critical challenge faced by rural communities across our state. We'll answer questions like, how can partnerships address these challenges in ways that foster community leadership? What does research look like when it is defined by those most affected? And much more. Join us in our exploration of what it can mean to be partners in place. Welcome to our first episode of the Partners in Place podcast. This episode covers a panel from the recent RISE Summit hosted by the Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships at UVM. Before we jump in, though, we want to provide a little context to the conversation that you'll be hearing. With that in mind, I'd like to welcome Martha Caswell, who is the Associate Director of UVM's Institute for Agroecology. Martha, can you give us the elevator pitch for the project that we'll be hearing about?
Yes, thank you, Emma. This is a participatory action research project that represents a new partnership across the Institute for Agroecology, the Center for an Agricultural Economy, Northeast Kingdom Organizing, and Rural Vermont, and it's designed to support just transitions and thriving food systems in the Northeast Kingdom. And we talk a lot more about those terms later on in the panel conversation. But this work is all in service of informing the strategic direction and co-creating viable plans across the partner organizations. And in describing this work, it feels important to name that we're not starting from zero. There's lots of good work that we will be pulling forward and building from. And one of our first objectives is to work on an update to the 2016 Regional Food Systems Report, considering what was recommended then in relation to current conditions and making modifications and additions for what might be needed in terms of current strategies and priorities for regional food systems in the NEK.
Awesome. Well, with that in mind, let's jump in.
Welcome, everybody. My name is Chris Callahan. I'm an extension faculty in agricultural engineering. I'm based in Bennington, Vermont, and I am thrilled to be here moderating this next session. It is simply called Partners in Place. And as with many things we've been discussing over the past 2 days, it's a simple thing that's going to get complex pretty quick and in a very fun way. So I want to invite you all into our galley-style living room here, where we're just going to have a normal conversation about a project that has been funded by the Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships. I would like to invite the panelists to actually introduce themselves while I sit down. So starting with Katie.
Hi, my name is Katie Horner. I'm a postdoc at the University of Vermont, and I work with the Institute for Agroecology.
Hi, my name is Meghan Wayland. I'm a community organizer, specifically a campaign director for Northeast Kingdom Organizing.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jon Ramsay. I'm the executive director at the Center for Agricultural Economy, also in Hardwick.
Hi everyone, my name is Martha Caswell. I am one of the co-directors at the Institute for Agroecology along with Ernesto Mendez and Colin Anderson.
Thank you. And who else is involved in this project? Other organizations?
Stage with us today is Rural Vermont. They are a statewide organization who works directly with producers and other food-related groups, and they're helping us once we get further along when we are thinking about the policy applications for our learnings.
Thanks, Martha. The other thing that we've heard referenced a lot over the past 2 days is the Northeast Kingdom, and I think you go through Hardwick to get there. Is that possible? What is the Northeast Kingdom for those who are not familiar with it? And
I'll start. The Northeast Kingdom is a place where people have a lot of land-based skills and have always had a lot of land-based skills and been interdependent and have really understood that interdependence, partially because it's somewhat geographically isolated, and also there's just the isolation of getting by and survival. And I think it's a place also where people with those skills are being displaced and undervalued, and maybe feel somewhat disenfranchised. And it's a place where we work, or hope to work, to really lift up those skills and keep people on land and value the voices of the people who live around us.
It's also a place of tremendous working landscapes and diverse working landscapes, forests, fields, farms, and there's a great connection between the people of the Northeast Kingdom and that working landscape. And there's also, it's also a big geography. It's a big chunk of the state of Vermont, and getting from one place to the other isn't always easy. But there's deep connection within communities, and a lot of municipalities that are wanting to support their communities and are willing to have organizations like ourselves and NICO, partner with them in ways that really bring home a number of innovative new projects. So a lot of collaboration happening there.
Great, thank you. So let's go back to NICO. And Megan, would you like to say a little bit about what NICO is and what you're up to?
Yeah. NICO is a grassroots organization, and we're member-led, we're multi-issue, which means that we have a couple different campaigns. Right now, we have a housing justice campaign. We're working on tenants' rights organizing, so going door to door with tenants in apartment buildings, forming tenants associations so people can fight against eviction. And then also helping communities come together to design housing solutions that really work for people who are unhoused or might be in risk of or in danger of losing their housing, or who are renters like myself. And we also have a social connection campaign, and that campaign is really part of this particular project that involves the Barton Hub, where we have 2 community meals a week. And it's also really related to transportation. We have a transportation sub-campaign under social connection, and that comes from organizing with people and going door to door in this community and realizing that people who live maybe a couple blocks away, even though we have a central place to meet and come together and get to know one another, may not be able to come to the space. And so we're working with Rural Community Transport and others to figure out some solutions to that particular problem.
Great, thank you. And John, would you like to say a little bit about CAE?
Sure, we're a nonprofit local food system organization. Our community connections work is really centered around place-based education. The Hazen principle is on the last panel, and I think there was a slide with the Recipe for Human Connection class that we help facilitate. So we're in deep partnership with our community in a number of different ways. So place-based education, food sovereignty, are part of our community connections work, as well as a place called Atkins Field, which is 15 acres within the downtown district of Hardwick. It's essentially a community green space that CAE owns and maintains, and that's where we have community gardens, meals, community orchard, workshops, and a lot of activities that bring the community together around local food. Our business resources work really expands outward from Hardwick, statewide. We do technical assistance on farms. We provide transfer planning work with farms who are in a moment of transition from one generation to the next, enterprise analysis, and then we have a revolving loan program that is also statewide, and have used that in emergency situations like the flood last year. And this project really is focusing on our food hub enterprises, which sort of expand even further outward from Hardwick and beyond. We have an amazing staff that every day aggregate, distribute, process, and move local food from farm to folks where they are around Vermont and Western New Hampshire. We manage, again, the Vermont Food Venture Center is another facility that we manage, inviting new entrepreneurs into that space to learn about growing their business, their value-added food business. And then the Yellow Barn project is something that we're deeply engaged with. It's a nonprofit, municipality, and for-profit business partnership between the municipality of Hardwick, Cabot Creamery, Jasper Hill Farm, and the Center for Agricultural Economy that really catalyzed a number of different funding sources, state and federal. I can't take the time to thank everybody enough for all of that has gone into that project. And CAE will be one of the 2 tenants in the new building, utilizing 12,000 square feet of space. So we're managing programs, partnerships, projects, and places.
Thanks, John. Megan, I blew by the introduction to Barton. Would you like to say anything more on this?
I always like to lift up the people that aren't here because I'm representing a community in a sense. And in Barton, we work with a lot of different people to make this project happen, and a lot of different other organizations that come together in this space. And so this is just a map of that place that I made to show that we have residents from the Barton Chamber Apartments who help run the meals, wash the dishes, cook meals. The Barton Library is a key partner. And then next to the Barton Library, we have a community garden, which was one of the first NECO projects. And they're a key partner in our community space. And then we also have residents of the flood. And I think it's one thing that I really failed to mention. So, or residents of Barton who have survived the flood. And we are in this like epic lift right now to rebuild 100 homes. And I see that Chris back there is part of long-term recovery, not just like mucking in people's homes, but actually rebuilding these houses. And we have to raise $1 million in the next, at least year or so. And that's because the people who were impacted by the flood, the first disaster that we've endured is capitalism and poverty. And the people who got impacted by the flood, that's the second hit. And we want to make sure that all the deferred maintenance and all of the housing security that can come out of rebuilding from this disaster happens. Because it's really part of this housing justice work. And as we talk about housing in the kingdom and throughout the state, recovering from this flood, helping people rebuild their homes, putting the roofs back on is really a key component of this. But then beyond that, we try to stay away from service and like get into the world of mutual aid and say like there's this place where you can plug in and you can meet your neighbors and you can cook a meal. And so kind of also getting beyond the charity landscape as much as possible to connect in this community center in Barton. So flood survivors are a key piece of that. And I can't say enough about Barton Village. They've been fantastic and have given us free space in Barton to do this work. And then there's just a slew of other people. I could go on and on. But this map shows some of those folks and where they're situated downtown.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And the third partner with us on the project is UVM Institute for Agroecology.
And the Institute for Agroecology was born about a year ago, but it is built on over a decade of work in the field of agroecology from folks who have been students and partners both within Vermont and actually all across the globe. So in following with that thanks, the work that we see today always has a lineage and a legacy before it. And agroecology is not a word that everyone uses every day. And so I want to make sure that as we're talking about it today, we have a shared understanding of what we mean when we say agroecology. And so to us, agroecology is an approach for ecologically sound, socially just, and economically viable food systems. And it's often talked about as incorporating science, so research and the ways that we can make practical movement, so thinking about the political and power, and practice. So what does it look like for me to actually grow food and produce food or collect and gather food in ways that are responsible to the environment and to the people who are involved in that food system. So within a university, agroecology is something that integrates social and natural sciences with local and indigenous knowledges. So we always think about multiple ways of knowing, and that's something that we're trying to bring together in the projects and work that we do. And it's something that's really, it's not recipes. There is not, you can't walk up and do agroecology. To do agroecology, it's an understanding of the way that systems work. It's thinking about the principles that might be the same across contexts, but what it really looks like in a particular space. And so that's one of the reasons that we're delighted to be working in a place that has such strong identity and such strong connection to land. The Institute for Agroecology works on 3 pillars. And so we're thinking about just transitions for food systems. We're doing participatory action research, which we see as doing research for people, with people, and we're always trying to center equity.
And you mentioned just transitions, which is a major part of the project, which I promise everybody we're getting to the project. We're still on introductions, which is fantastic. But do you want to say a little bit about just transitions before we get into that?
I can take that. So Just Transitions, as you heard from Martha, is a framework that we use a lot at the Institute for Agroecology, and it's particularly applicable in this partnership with Center for an Agricultural Economy and Northeast Kingdom Organizing. I believe it's also a framework that you talk about in your organizing, in your communities' meetings up in the Northeast Kingdom. And you've heard it mentioned over the last 2 days, but really briefly, we understand it as moving from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy. And I loved the scene that we got to witness from the Civic Standard yesterday. It was an excerpt from a community theater production, and I think it really showed how conventional narratives and strategies for development have not served most rural places well. And so we use Just Transitions because we think it's a really helpful framework for identifying that reality and then moving forward and saying, what are the alternatives? How can we really center community autonomy and agency in this process of envisioning ways forward that aren't rooted in those development narratives and strategies that have not worked for people in rural places?
Thank you, Katie. So, what is the project?
So, this project started from this concept of a regional scorecard. We heard this idea from a farmer who lives up in the kingdom that it would be so helpful to have a scorecard to chart progress, for people in the Northeast Kingdom to chart their own progress forward. And as we started to talk about this idea, we very quickly realized that to chart your progress forward, you really need to have a clear sense of where you want to go. And to have a clear sense of where you want to go, you need to be really firmly rooted in the present moment. And you need to have this intentionality to avoid reproducing some of the inequities and exclusions that exist currently. So we were very quickly kind of moving backwards. So to vision into the future, we need to understand where we are now. And to understand where we are now, we need to understand how we got here. And so this project really has grown out of those conversations, and it's trying to facilitate this process of understanding what has happened in these towns, in Hardwick and in Barton, and how has that gotten us to the present moment, and how can those conversations around that help people collectively envision what they want for the future in these places. And we're really aiming to facilitate this process in a way that's really empowering, that brings people into the center of this process to say, I'm the expert of my own lived experience. So we really are visioning this research collaboration as not just a way to kind of collaboratively and collectively start to make sense of what's happening in these places, but also using the research process itself as a vehicle for social cohesion and for really fostering a sense of pride and belonging in these towns. And I don't know, how does that sound to you all? What did I leave out?
I guess I would just say that our work is very embedded within community, and it's really we are very much in the day-to-day. We are moving food, processing food in the schools. We're in the community, and to have the Institute for Agroecology help us sort of look beyond what we're doing day to day really feels important in this moment as we're coming out of the pandemic and then a flood last year, and we're making these massive investments in infrastructure that are really like so far beyond what we should be doing as an organization of our size. To help chart that path forward feels really reassuring to know that we're taking the time and having their expertise and capacity to help us map that out forward. So we feel really privileged to be a part of this project with NICO and Rural Vermont and Institute for Agroecology.
Anybody have anything else on that?
This sort of just flows into something that has been fun for us, because I think as researchers and as folks who represent the university out in the community, we take very seriously the idea that we're doing things that are interesting, but that we're also doing things that have utility, that are going to be useful. And in early conversations with the partners, there was this question about how are we going to have enough time to add this on top of all of the other work that we already do, because we see value in these partnerships. We know that there are things that we need to know that we don't yet have organized. And we, as the Institute folks, were thinking, you know a lot. You already have a lot. How do we convince you that you are already doing the bulk of this work? And what you need is mirrors and people asking you good questions and folks who can help you organize and process the information on the other side. So this past Friday, we worked with Luis Vivanco, who is in the anthropology department here, to have an observant participation workshop up at the Center for an Ag Economy with the entire team from this project, in which what we were doing is saying, do your day-to-day work, but let's use these different tools and these different practices so that you can be seeing your day-to-day through a researcher's eyes, so that you can be capturing what's going on in your day-to-day with some discipline, so that you can then call that data instead of calling it what Sam said yesterday. And so it was really neat to have the conversation and watch sparks happening around the table of recognition. We do this. We already are researchers, but we haven't known what to do with this. Or having the confidence that now there's a relationship where when something is a question or when there is a pile of information, that there's folks who are willing and able to jump in, dig in, process, and analyze it together. And I don't know if there's anything else you want to add about that experience or some of the other things that we're learning together, I think, as this project unfolds.
I guess I'll say that in having this observant participation workshop, I think it was really enlightening for me. There's this question of like, well, how do I become a researcher? But there's also this question from UVM of how do we come in as the outsider to communities? And I said something like, just be a dishwasher. And this idea that you could center yourself in the middle of a kitchen and just pay attention, that's an important skill, because we don't actually need, in the traditional sense, researchers to come to the community. But we do need people paying attention. And I think it helped me. So I took that workshop on Friday, and then on Saturday, Nico led a workshop in Brattleboro around housing justice organizing, where we talked about tenants unions. And then on Sunday, we tabled at the Pride Parade in Newport, and someone came up to us, as like often happens, and told us their housing story, which is usually a nightmare. And it's like, here, I have this landlord, doesn't want to fix anything, also wants to raise my rent by a third, $550. And so what I say now to this person, having gone through this trajectory, is just, when you're in the elevator, when you're at the stoop or whatever, wherever you are in this space, pay attention to who has a similar story. Because if we can tell a collective story as a building, and this is my job as an organizer, to say, you don't want to get picked off one by one. If you alone resist your landlord, you're probably going to get evicted. But if you as a building can hold it down, then you have this collective power, and that collective power comes from a story that you tell each other about what's going on, and that you tell each other about what power is and who the target is. And I think it feels like because of this partnership, had a new skill set to just say, pay attention to this thing. I'll call you Friday. Who are your allies? We'll come up and have a house meeting. We'll get all these folks together and we'll figure out, what the next steps might be. And I think there's, what we're learning here, I think is going to help me develop as an organizer, and then also help develop others as an organizer as well. And the power to say, we're researching, and what our experience matters, and there's data, and we can use that data for power.
So how did the project come to be? Were there prior relationships, other work?
There were prior relationships, which happened to be very convenient, because that is such a crucial part of this work, and it's something that is not often valued in the same way that other later stages of the research process are valued. So we were very lucky that many of us did know each other. So I met Meghan years ago because we vended next to each other at a farmer's market. And it's funny, but it's also actually really important because we trusted each other. I wasn't some outsider coming from the university, coming from Chittenden County, who she had never met before, saying, let's work together. So I think there was some of that trust there already, and there were other pre-existing relationships amongst the individuals on this stage and also the organizations that we're representing.
Meghan and I both have a farming background, and we both were vendors at a Hill Farmstead brewery event years ago where you were doing tacos and I was doing burgers. So yes, we've known each other for a long time. But NICO and the Center for Agroecological Economy have deep connections. NICO was born out of a listening campaign at the Center for Agroecological Economy, and we realized that there were issues and things to tackle that, as a food system organization, would sort of be outside of our scope and mission. And so rather than trying to sort of hold all of that, NICO, a new nonprofit, was born in 2019, I believe, 2019. And to me, it's also an example of resource sharing and relationship that goes beyond partnership. So resource sharing, yes, in the sense of funding and things of that nature, but also resource sharing in relationships, and resource sharing in infrastructure, and resource sharing in staff capacity. So our work with NICO is really CA's work is NICO's work, and NICO's work is CA's work in so many ways, especially around food sovereignty, and so that work continues. And with NICO, it provides us with a template, so to speak, to have community organizing principles and practice, to keep that part of our core mission and values. So there's a tremendous amount of value in relationships that really goes beyond the day-to-day work. It's how the work takes shape.
Maybe I'll just add that there are also intentional connections being made across the food system. So I met Leahy, the Director of Communications at CAE, through Food Solutions New England's leadership program. And so I visited because I had heard of this organization that I knew a little bit about, but wanted to come see and practice, and met Meghan, who then was the food sovereignty organizer for CAE. And so these things sometimes unfold over years, And one of the things that felt important in terms of how this project came together is that when Leahy offered money, everybody in the state, I think, perked up. And pretty much everyone in the state submitted an application, I'm pretty sure. And so what we wanted to do is figure out how we could be in some sort of synergy with each other without being in competition with each other. So the backstory is that each of us as organizations turned in proposals. And then through the process, we were matched to say, hey, there's something here. We unfortunately don't have sufficient funds to fund all of you at the levels that you have requested, but how about you start out together and we see where this can go? And so I appreciate that both in terms of what trust affords. I think if we hadn't known each other and had some pre-existing relationship, that probably wouldn't have been an easy request that was made to us. But I also appreciate sort of the signaling that shows from the Leahy Institute about what they're trying to do, which is see when there are connections and try to help additional connections to blossom.
We also wrote letters of support for each other, and actually coordinated narrative in the applications. And again, it's really based on the connectivity of the work itself.
And I think for us, we threw our hat in the ring as NECO because so many people in Barton were saying we really need transportation. And so we threw in a transportation application. And I think it's helpful for us to, and we had the community write the grant with us. And like, or what do we want? And it's really helpful to have ideas backed by money because it's the momentum. And it's like we could sit around and talk about all of this and how we want a route to Newport, and we want it for more than just medical appointments. We want to have dignity. We want to get our hair cut. We want to go to Walmart. And it's like, cool. We'll put in this application, and then I think we can still go back to the community now and say, all right, this is one step in this journey for figuring out like what we need, what will work, and it keeps the momentum going. So this partnership will help us, we hope, catapult us to the next level of having public transportation in Barton.
Great. So it's clearly early days in this project. It's a project that, as you've described, it's work that you've described, which is slow, long-term, very intentional, careful. How is it going? What's it looking like? What's it feeling like for those who are involved?
So I can give one example, and I think maybe we'll just sort of popcorn it around to share some snippets of what's going on right now and how it's been feeling. I think we have had a number of meetings in which we've all been really open to just this iterative and evolutionary process that's really responding to what the communities that you all work with are saying they need. And I think we've been able to work together in that really emergent and iterative way because of those pre-existing relationships. So that's been one thing that has been going really well. And I say that both because it's true, and I want to also highlight in this context how important those foundational relationships are, and how important it is to have them when you're going into this kind of long-term collaborative work. Particularly in rural places where there's so much that you need to know and understand about a place. So one activity that we have coming up next Monday is that folks from Center for an Agricultural Economy are leading facilitation of a community meal and River of Life storytelling event. And so this is a research methodology that we had talked about, and folks from CAE were like, oh yeah, we can run with this because this actually aligns so well with what we do at CAE and what we do at NECO. We are used to going out into communities, organizing, asking people to share their stories, and this is a storytelling method. And so it asks people to use the metaphor of a river to chart out collectively what is the history of this place that we all share, and how, starting as far back as we can go, welcoming community elders in first, how can we chart this path to the present moment? How can we really visualize together how we've gotten here, and then take that forward to see where we want to go? And you call people up one by one, and you have this big piece of paper, and it's a way for people not only to share their stories, but also to express themselves in different forms. Sometimes people aren't as comfortable talking one-on-one, but in this context where I can walk up to this actual big river and I can put a Post-it, or I can look at the stories that people have shared and kind of visualize my community and the history unfolding. It's a different context for people to share their experience and their knowledge of this place. So that's one event that we've got coming up, and we're pretty excited. And it's been really wonderful to see kind of the ability to share leadership of different aspects of the research, and to see how well it's dovetailing the research itself with what's already happening in these places, the work that CAE and NICO are already doing.
I think one of the things that's working really well for me personally, and for NICO, I guess to extension, is that I'm understanding research doesn't have to be extractive. It doesn't have to be somebody parachuting in, or like observing from a tower and saying like, here we are, we're experts, or we have this really specialized knowledge and it's like hidden behind all these things, and we will watch you and then we'll put out a report. If this partnership I feel really fortunate to be in, and I don't know if I'd want to be in a different one. I don't know if it would be responsible for me to be in a different one as an organizer, but it feels like it's really integrated, and it's integrated in story, and it's integrated in the community, and I think it feels really community driven and led, and that there will be a way to weave this in. We've already started weaving it in from the beginning, and I think that's been a nice surprise, that's been working well.
Another piece that we're really excited about is the work that we'll be doing specifically with farm and food business enterprises, and how that intersects as we begin to operationalize our new infrastructure space at the Yellow Barn project. It was 2019 that CA took on a private business called Farm Connects, and we've been running literally 100 miles an hour since. Our organization has tripled in size, and at that time when we took on Farm Connects, we got all of the producers together who were using that service, and they all came to Hardwick, and we asked the question, is this an essential service? And the answer from the producer group was yes. And this project really gives us the opportunity to re-engage with our producers in a way that is outside of the day-to-day work. The day-to-day work is hard, it's messy, it's on dirt roads, and it's in snowstorms and dirt roads that have been flooded out, and infrastructure that's inadequate for the scale of work that we're doing. So to be able to take a moment and actually engage with our entrepreneurs and producers who provide us so much feels really, really important as we operationalize that new space. What we're trying to do is build facilities that reduce redundancies on farms, that helps farms remain resilient and viable. So rather than a farm needing their own truck, they can use our trucking service. And instead of a farm needing to put in their own cold and frozen and root crop storage, they can use ours, as well as our commercial kitchens and our other facilities. So, we're really excited about that part of the work. And the other piece of this that we're really taking a bold step on is we're fitting up our new space with a net zero design, which is literally adding $1.3 million to the budget, but will have enormous environmental impact benefits over the decades of that facility. So we have a very innovative refrigeration system, which is the core component of that net zero design, which will also be the primary heat source for our 12,000 square feet, which will be primarily powered by a solar array on the roof with a wood pellet boiler as the backup heat in really severe cold weather. So similar to the Food Venture Center, which has been a facility that so many people across the country have benefited from learning about, We share how much it costs to operate. We share how much, capacity it takes to keep the lights on, how we staff it, how we, manage it. We also want this new facility to be an example that other people can take ideas away from and take those ideas, make them their own, and hopefully incorporate them into new infrastructure that they're beginning to think about.
I think one of the things that stands out to me so far is an affirmation of a slower approach that we prefer to take, which sometimes doesn't line up with the timeline that's expected on a project. And so when we can look at this as the beginning of something that's going to have different component parts, but that what we're doing right now is laying the foundation, it feels good, and it feels right that we're starting with story. Thinking back to the keynote yesterday where Tony Pippa from the Brookings Institute was saying, there's power in narrative. We believe that. And I think the other thing that feels like it's revealing itself through this process is that by engaging folks in telling their story, we're also working towards organic leadership. So that then when we're talking about where we want to go, we've been building this plan together, and so people are lining up ready to enact it as well. So it may be a little bit short of a full metric scorecard by the end of this funding cycle, but we feel like that's a reasonable trade-off if what we have built in the meantime is folks who can continue asking questions that matter and have a sense of how to find the answers that are going to get them somewhere in the meantime. And I feel like that's what we're seeing start to bubble up and happen. So that feels really good.
So when Katie mentioned this really being a very iterative and emergent project, and a lot of what you just said makes me think that not to completely change the topic of the session with 12 minutes left, but and redesign the grant making process for the world, but it can be pretty rigid. In terms of what you do relative to what you proposed, and I'm curious what this experience has been like for you in that regard. I mean, this is a very emergent and fluid project that is, I read the proposal. It's a fantastic proposal. And you're already, I think, finding things that you didn't plan for. And so how is that part of this project turned out for you so far?
Well, so far it's been great. Maybe ask us when we're writing up the final report in 6 months.
Yeah.
I feel like the Leahy Institute has been really supportive of giving us that freedom to kind of respond to community needs and to work from our initial proposal as sort of a starting point. But with this emphasis on partnership, there's also been this emphasis on flexibility, right? And that's so key. And it's also pretty rare, I think, in a lot of funding scenarios. So we've been pretty grateful for that. And I also think that long-term, it's so efficient. Can we reclaim that word efficiency as something good? I was having a conversation with another one of our project partners who's here today who works at CAE, and we were talking about this, about how the project has evolved and how is it feeling, and having a check-in about that. And she said the phrase, work slow to go fast. And that really, I think, captures how I'm feeling about the project, which is that we're taking the time right now to be really intentional about how can this work serve partner organizations like NICO and CAE, but more importantly, how can it serve the people who are living in Barton and Hardwick? And I think that will get us towards what we initially proposed. It'll allow us to do that work better long term, and have that work be more impactful. So I think that process of emergence and the flexibility to honor that process has been going so well, and it feels, I feel very lucky that we get to do that work together.
That's the way it looks from the outside, so that's great. I'm about to ask the last prepared question I have, and I would love to invite anybody who has a question in the audience to find their way to one of the 3 microphones, and I will keep an eye out for you. So, a key question in all this work is, so what? Right? We should always be asking that of ourselves, and I won't ask it that way, because that's rude, but what should someone in the audience take away from the conversation we just had and from the work so far on this project?
Well, we were talking about this question about an hour ago before this session started, and Megan, you were talking about how some of the challenges of the Northeast Kingdom are challenges that are, rural communities are facing, across the country and in other parts of Vermont. And I think that the Northeast Kingdom is a specific place, but these challenges that we're speaking about are not unique to the Northeast Kingdom.
Yes, I did say that. And that's true. And I think, we also had like NAFTA, which also made it hard to be a rural person in Mexico and other parts of the world. And I think there is I think there's sort of, I don't know if it's like, I don't want to be melodramatic. I was about to say, an assault on rural life, that's a little much. And I think that the way to get through this is through skills and understanding each other and knowing the people around us and showing up for them and having like the skills that will help us get through the challenges that are upcoming in our lives. And I think the thing to take away, maybe, I don't know, one singular thing, but one thing that I'm hoping for from this project is that there's a lot of leadership that comes out of Story and like a lot of really a pride in being a rural person. I grew up in a really rural place, 600 people were in my township, and I learned from a very young age just to get the hell out as soon as I could. And I really want people to feel pride in being a working class person, being a skilled person, being a rural person. And I hope that, the issue will always change, the issues are many. So I'm hoping that through Story and some of this research and some of this process that we get to undergo with the support here from this team, as a community, we have better leadership and we understand ourselves as leaders in a place and feel really proud of who we are and what we've got going on.
I guess the thing I would add is that we've been through 2 major emergencies just in the last couple of years, and this work really informed how we were going to respond to those emergencies. So, literally the day after the flood, NICO was already springing into action, and CAE was already deeply engaged with partners like the Civic and Hardwick Food Pantry and Hardwick Rescue and others. And this work, I think, helps inform how rural communities can respond to those emergencies that we will face in the future.
And I think it is the responsibility of folks with the positionality of the university and the networks to other resources and people to connect with these places, because I think then we can be even more powerful and we can shine light on the amazing strength and resiliency that exists in the communities, but not ask them to do everything themselves.
Great, thank you all. Any questions from the audience?
Hi, everybody. My name is Stephen Marshall. I'm a Master's of Science candidate here at UVM. I study resilience. I think what you're bringing a celebration to us, a celebration of community organizing, community solidarity. it's I don't know. For me, beautiful images keep passing through my mind, and I'm like, yay! So I got a question that might be a little offbeat, but I think you're ready to answer it. The stereotype of rural people is largely ignorant or maybe not well educated, and the stereotype of people moving into educated people moving into rural areas is of gentrification. And I wonder if, because I don't see the people seated here as being gentrifiers, and I know you're educated, so what I'm feeling and seeing, I'm wondering really, is are we witnessing an evolution or an emergence of a new model of living in the country, where educated people can bring skills and help to make the environment more complex and make things possible that weren't possible before, or maybe even just discover things that were happening that were not visible before. Your thoughts, please. Thank you.
I think as long as there's an exchange. I think you mentioned something really important, and I think it's prejudice. And there's a lot, I heard an article recently about how academia or people graduating from college, their number one prejudice is against poor working class people and rural people. Like, those people are dumb, they're hicks. And so I think, yeah, absolutely, you can go anywhere and have, from an outsider eye, have a beautiful impact, and it takes all of us. And I think it would have to be also understanding and really valuing the fact that your neighbor could probably like save your butt, and will be able to hunt food, and will be able to do, we'll be able to fix your car. And as long as we don't all convert to Teslas, and that will be really helpful. And so I think as long as there's an exchange and prejudice doesn't get in the way, absolutely there could be a new rurality. And I think absolutely we want a multiracial rurality. So we will live in Vermont, especially the Kingdom, is one of the most climate stable regions in the country. And so right now we're experiencing people who can afford to be climate refugees to come to our neighborhoods, rich people. But there will soon be influxes of people who by no choice are also, they're milking our cows. Or they're milking cows in the Kingdom, and our neighbors already. But yeah, absolutely, there will be new people, and we have to be ready for that in all sorts of ways.
Thanks for the question, Stephen. Any other thoughts on that?
I think that as organizations, we have the ability to connect with a lot of different folks, including folks who have resources, and help guide how they share their resources in the community. And we shouldn't be sort of shy from being rank at times with funders. I mean, that's something that we have stepped out at times to do, and just actually push back a little bit and say, okay, well, this is not how we're going to solve the problem, and here's a way in which you can engage. And I totally agree I love how you just phrased, that exchange. I just really appreciate that. Thank you, Megan.
Any other questions? Cool. Katie, Megan, John, Martha, thank you so much for sharing your stories around your project and being willing to be recorded doing so. I appreciate that. And I also want to thank Emma Spett and Cecilia Boyson and Andy Chamberlain in particular, who have done and are doing a lot of work behind the scenes. As I mentioned earlier, this will be episode 1 of the Partners in Place podcast. You can subscribe by scanning that QR code or going to the UVM short link, go.uvm.edu/PIP launch. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for joining us for our first episode of the Partners in Place podcast. We're so grateful to our panelists, our RISE attendees, our listeners, and our team. Before we wrap up, Martha, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I want to just note that the Northeast Kingdom has been in the news a lot because of recent floods and extreme weather that has made this a really hard summer. But to balance out that hard news, it feels important to reiterate one of the project goals, which is increasing the visibility of the region and the innovative community-led efforts to improve food systems resilience. So stay tuned for updated plans and hopefully more awareness about all the good work that's going on in the Northeast Kingdom.
You'll be able to watch this conversation back on YouTube and on our website. To keep in touch with us, follow along on social media and join our email list. If you have a collaborative project that you're inspired by or that you're a part of, we'd love to hear from you. Send us a line and we'll get in touch. I'm Cecilia Boyson, and I'm a staff assistant at the Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships.
This podcast was produced and edited by me, Andy Chamberlain.
This is Partners in Place, sharing stories of community-centered research, education, and extension with positive impact. Find us at UVM Partners in Place.